My brother handed me the box with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We were sitting around my mother's Christmas table, the candles lit, the good china out, the whole performance of a happy family in full effect. For one brief, foolish second, I thought he was trying. I thought maybe this year would be different. I was wrong. I peeled back the wrapping paper. Inside was an ancestry kit. A plastic tube, a sterile swab, the same kind you can buy at any drugstore for $30. My brother picked up his wine glass. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair with the ease of a man who has never once been afraid of anything, he said, "Maybe this will finally answer the question we've all been too polite to ask. Whether you were actually planned or just the accident that derailed Mom's real life." My mother laughed. A short, nervous sound she hid behind her napkin. My aunt stared at her plate. My brother held my gaze across the table, still smiling, waiting to see if I would cry. I didn't cry. I set the box down very carefully on the tablecloth and I looked at him. I looked at the way his jaw was set, the way his fingers drummed once against the stem of his glass, the way his eyes were too bright, too eager. This wasn't a joke. A joke is something you tell to make a room laugh. A joke doesn't require that kind of preparation. This was something else, and whatever it was, it had been planned well before Christmas. Before I tell you what happened next, like and subscribe, drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? My name is Nora. I am 29 years old and I grew up in a small town in eastern Tennessee, the kind of place where everybody knows your last name before they know your face. My family's last name was Calloway. My father built a real estate and property management business from nothing, starting with one rental house and ending with a portfolio of commercial properties that ran most of the county's main street. By the time I was born, the Calloway name meant something in that town. It also meant something inside our house, just not the same thing. My brother was 6 years older than me. He was tall and broad like my father, with sandy hair and an easy laugh that made people trust him immediately. From the time I can remember, he was the center of gravity in our house. Everything orbited around him. My parents went to every one of his baseball games. My mother kept a scrapbook of every article the local paper ever printed about him. His college acceptance letter was framed on the wall of my father's office. I was the afterthought. I knew it the way you know things as a child. Not because anyone said it plainly, but because of the texture of every ordinary day. The way my parents' voices went warm when he walked into a room and neutral when I did. The way my father once stopped mid-sentence when I came downstairs to ask if I could borrow the car, looked at me for a moment like he was calculating something, and then said, "Go ask your mother." Not no. Not yes. Just a redirect. A quiet removal. I was 8 years old when I figured out the rule. The rule was that my brother came first. In every room, in every conversation, in every decision. I didn't come second. There was no second place. There was first place, and then there was everyone else, and I lived somewhere in that blurred category of everyone else. The moment I remember most clearly is the night of my 6th grade science fair. I had spent 3 weeks on my project. It was on water filtration. I had built a working model out of gravel and sand and a 2-liter bottle. My teacher had told me it was one of the best she had seen in years. I had printed my display boards myself. I had practiced my presentation in front of the bathroom mirror until I could do it without looking at my notes. The fair was on a Thursday evening. My father had promised he would be there. At 6 o'clock, I stood at my table in the school gymnasium, watching the door. Other families filed in. I watched mothers and fathers bend over displays and ask questions and take pictures. I watched my teacher walk past and give me an encouraging nod. I kept watching the door. At 7:15, my teacher came over and told me the judges were starting. She asked if I was ready. I said yes. I gave my presentation to 3 judges and no family. I answered every question correctly. They gave me first place, a blue ribbon and a $25 gift card to the science supply store. I drove home with my mother, who had picked me up at 8. She asked how it went, and I said, "Fine." She said that was nice and turned up the radio. When we got home, my father and my brother were in the living room watching a game. My father looked up. "How was it?" he said. "I won first place," I said, and held up the ribbon. He nodded once. "Good job," he said, and held up the ribbon. He nodded once. "Good job," he said. Then he turned back to the television. I put the ribbon in my desk drawer. I never took it out again. By the time I was a teenager, I had already begun building a life that didn't depend on them for anything emotional. I studied because I liked learning, not because I wanted their approval. I made my own friends, earned my own spending money, saved everything I could. When I left for college on an academic scholarship, my mother hugged me at the door. My father shook my hand. My brother, home for the weekend, watched from the couch and said, "Don't expect them to visit. They'll be too busy with my firm." He had started working with my father the year before, learning the business from the ground up. My father was grooming him. That was understood. The business would go to him. Everything would go to him. I had accepted that a long time ago. What I had not accepted, and what I had never fully let myself examine, was how deliberate it all was, how structured, how the imbalance wasn't just habit or thoughtlessness, but something more intentional. I didn't start examining it until my father died. He had a stroke in October. He was 64. He had been healthy, or so we thought, and then one morning he was gone. I drove back to Tennessee from Nashville, where I was teaching at a middle school. I organized the food for the reception after the service. I called the out-of-town relatives. I arranged the flowers. My brother sat with my mother and received condolences. People told him how much he looked like my father. At the reception, my aunt pulled me aside. She was my father's younger sister, a quiet woman who had always seemed slightly sad in a way nobody acknowledged. She held both my hands and looked at me for a long moment. She said, "Your father loved you, Nora. I know it didn't always look that way, but he did. I want you to know that." I thanked her. I assumed she was just saying what people say at funerals. 3 weeks later, my brother texted me, "Christmas at Mom's. Be there." He didn't ask. He never asked. I drove back down on the 23rd. The house looked the same wreath on the door, the same plastic reindeer on the front lawn that my father had bought 15 years ago and refused to replace because he said they still worked fine. Inside, my mother had cooked enough food for twice as many people. My aunt was there. My brother was there with his wife, a thin, sharp woman named Patricia, who had a way of looking at everything in a room and calculating its worth. The evening was the performance it always was. My brother talked about the business. Patricia talked about their kitchen renovation. My mother laughed at everything my brother said. I sat and participated just enough to avoid the specific discomfort of being asked why I was so quiet. Then came the gifts. Patricia handed them out from under the tree, with the efficiency of someone who considers gift-giving a logistics problem. My brother handed me the ancestry kit. After his comment about the accident that derailed Mom's real life, the table went quiet in a specific way. Not shocked. Quiet in the way of people who have already absorbed the blow secondhand and are waiting to see what happens to the person it landed on. I picked up the box again. I turned it over in my hands. My mother was still not looking at me. Patricia was watching my brother with a small private smile. My aunt was the only one who met my eyes, and what I saw in her face was not pity. It was something closer to urgency. I put the box in my purse. I finished the dinner. I helped clear the plates. I said goodnight. I drove to the motel 2 towns over where I had booked a room because I had stopped staying in that house the moment I realized I always left it feeling smaller than when I arrived. I sat on the edge of the motel bed with the box in my lap. The room smelled like industrial cleaning products, and the heater rattled against the wall. I held the kit, and I thought about what my brother had said. Not the surface of it, the cruelty, the performance, but the structure underneath. He had been specific. He hadn't said you were an accident, the generic insult. He had said the accident that derailed Mom's real life. That was a detail. Details come from somewhere. I thought about my mother's laugh at the table. Not horrified, not even surprised, nervous. I opened the kit. I swabbed my cheek. I sealed the tube. The next morning, I drove to the post office before I drove home. I paid extra for expedited results. 14 days. They felt like the longest 14 days of my adult life. I went back to Nashville. I taught my classes. I graded papers. I cooked dinner alone in my apartment and watched the clock. I called my aunt twice. She answered both times, but something in her voice was cautious, careful, like a person walking across ice that might not hold. On the 11th day, she called me first. "Nora," she said, "I need to tell you something. but I need to do it in person. I drove back to Tennessee that weekend. She lived in a small house on the edge of town, nothing like the Calloway property. She had spent most of her life in the financial shadow of my father's success, and she wore it with a kind of dignity that I had always respected without fully understanding. She let me in, made coffee, and sat across from me at her kitchen table. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Your brother found something when he was 22. I waited. Your mother kept letters," she said, "from before she married your father. There was a man she had been serious about before. The relationship ended badly, but they were in contact again briefly, just for a few months, a few years into your parents' marriage. Your brother found one of the letters when he was going through a box in the attic. He took it to your mother." I watched her face. "How long ago?" I said. 7 years, she said. "He's been using it ever since." 7 years. I ran the math. My brother had been given full operational control of my father's business 6 years ago. My mother had renovated his kitchen 2 years before that. Patricia wore a ring that cost more than my annual salary. He told her that if she ever said anything to your father, he would destroy the family, my aunt continued. He said your father would leave her. He said she would lose everything. So she let him take what he wanted. She let him drain the business his way. She let him exclude you from everything because the one time you asked a question about the estate 7 years ago, he told her that if you got involved, he would tell your father everything. I remember that. I had asked my father once, at a family dinner, whether I would have any role in the business eventually. I had asked it carefully, gently. My brother had laughed and said Nora's a school teacher. Dad, what would she do? Teach the tenants long division. Everyone had moved on. I had assumed that was just how it was. It wasn't just how it was. It was managed. Does your father know? I said. Did he know about the letters? My aunt looked at her coffee cup. That is what I needed to tell you, she said. I don't know what the DNA test will show you, Nora, but I know what your father believed. And I know that 6 months before he died, he hired someone to look into your brother's financials. I went still. He came to me, she said. He told me he had been watching for a while. He didn't tell me everything, but he told me enough. He said he was making sure things were handled properly before he died. He said he was not going to let Daniel walk away with what wasn't his. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Whatever the test says, she told me, your father saw you. He always saw you. He just didn't know how to say it in a language you could hear. I drove back to Nashville that night. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for a long time. On the 14th day, the email came. I was in my classroom during lunch, and my hands were shaking when I opened the portal on my phone. The results loaded slowly. Ethnicity estimate, matches, shared DNA percentages. I scrolled to parent-child matches. The screen showed one name under the highest percentage category. My father's name, James Robert Calloway, 50% shared DNA. Parent-child, he was my father. My real father. Biologically, without question. I sat in that empty classroom for a long time, listening to the sound of kids in the hallway outside, and I felt something shift. The ancestry kit had not proven what my brother intended it to prove. He had handed me a weapon thinking it would confirm his version of the family story. Instead, it had just confirmed mine. But that still left the question of what he actually knew and what he had been planning. Because if my brother had been blackmailing my mother for 7 years, and he had handed me a DNA test designed to humiliate me, he had been preparing for the will reading for longer than I had understood. My father's estate attorney had scheduled the reading for January. I had less than 3 weeks. I called my aunt that night. I told her what the results showed. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. Then we need to make sure you're protected, she said. Don't go to that reading alone. I spent the next 10 days calling every estate attorney in Nashville until I found one who could take my case immediately. Her name was Ms. Vance. She was 50, efficient, and had the particular stillness of someone who has seen every version of this story before and knows exactly where each one ends. I told her everything. The ancestry kit, the 7 years of blackmail, my aunt's account of my father's private investigation. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Bring me every document you have and I will handle the rest." The reading was on a Tuesday afternoon at Henderson Law on the main square downtown. I arrived early with Ms. Vance. The conference room was paneled in dark wood, and it smelled of old paper and furniture polish. The family attorney, Mr. Garrett, was already at the head of the table, a thick document in front of him. My mother arrived next. She looked small in her black coat, her hair recently done in the way she always prepared herself for public events. She sat across from me, and her eyes found mine for 1 second before they slid away. My brother came in with Patricia. He was wearing a suit he had bought recently. I could tell by the way it still held its shape. He sat down, glanced at Ms. Vance, and raised his eyebrows at me. He smiled with the side of his mouth that he used when he thought he was the smartest person in a room. "Brought a lawyer," he said. "Nervous?" "Prepared," I said. Patricia touched his arm. He stopped smiling, but his eyes were still bright with it. Mr. Garrett cleared his throat and began. The language was formal and slow, the way legal language always is. Debts to be settled, outstanding accounts addressed, a small charitable bequest to the church my father had attended since childhood. My mother was to receive the house, fully paid, and a monthly living stipend drawn from a trust. Then my brother's name. My brother leaned forward slightly. "To my son Daniel, Mr. Tram." Garrett read, "I leave the sum of $100,000. The reading of this amount is contingent on completion of a full independent audit of Calloway Property Holdings, to be conducted within 90 days of this reading. Any discrepancy found between the audit and the existing company records will be deducted from the sum before disbursement." My brother's expression didn't collapse. It froze. Like a man who has heard something in a language he thought he knew and suddenly realizes he missed the grammar. "100,000, he said. "That's the total?" Mr. Garrett did not look up. "There is more," he said. He turned the page. "To my daughter Nora," Mr. Garrett read. There it was. My name in my father's legal document, written by his hand, or at least by his direction. "To my daughter Nora, I leave majority ownership of Calloway Property Holdings, along with all associated assets and the investment portfolio held in the company trust. This represents approximately 78% of the total estate value." The room was very quiet. "This is wrong," my brother said. His voice had lost its easy quality. It was flatter now. "He's confused. He didn't understand what he was signing." "He understood everything he signed," Ms. Vance said. "She said it the way you say something you have already prepared to say." "He would never leave the business to her," my brother said, louder now, turning toward my mother. Tell them he would never have done this. She's a teacher. She doesn't know anything about real estate." My mother stared at the table. "Daniel," Mr. Garrett said. "She's not even competent," my brother continued. He was starting to unravel at the edges, the way people do when they have been holding something tight for too long and the grip suddenly slips. "This is because someone got to him. She got to him, or she got to you, or there's been some kind of manipulation here." Mr. Garrett allowed him to finish. Then he said, "There is an addendum attached to the section regarding Nora's inheritance, which your father specifically requested be read aloud." My brother went still. "Mr. Garrett cleared his throat again and read from the attached letter. He wrote it by hand. I recognized the slope of the letters, even from across the table. It said, "I was not the father I should have been to Nora. I was present in the house and absent in every way that mattered. I told myself it was just the way I was, that she knew I was proud even if I never said it, that she would understand when she was older. I was wrong, and I knew I was wrong for a long time before I admitted it. 3 years ago, I began to understand that someone in my house had been building walls around her for reasons I did not yet fully see. It took me too long to look clearly. When I finally did, what I found made me ashamed, not of Nora, but of myself for letting it happen. My daughter has built her entire life with her own hands, without $1 of help from me, without asking for anything, without demanding recognition she deserved. If character is the measure of a person, then Nora is the best Calloway I ever raised. I should have told her that while I was alive. I am telling her now, in the only language I have left." The room was very quiet. My brother had stopped talking. He was staring at the table. I felt something release in my chest. Not happiness exactly. Something more complicated than that. Grief, maybe, for the years between us that the letter couldn't give back. But also, beneath the grief, something solid. He had seen me. Not perfectly, not in time to change the shape of our relationship, but he had seen me. He had written it down and made it permanent and made sure I would hear it. "There is one more matter," Mr. Garrett said. He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a manila envelope. He set it in the center of the table. "Your father asked me to present this if his son chose to contest the will or raise any objection to the distribution of assets." My brother looked at the envelope. "What is that?" Patricia said. Mr. Garrett slid it toward my brother. Daniel's hand went to it slowly, the way you touch something you already suspect will burn you. He opened it. I watched his face as he read the first page. The color drained out of it in a way that was almost physical, like watching water leave a cloth. He turned to the second page. His hands were not steady. "He knows," my brother said quietly. "Mr. Garrett said, over the last 18 months of his life, your father retained a private investigator and a forensic accountant to review Calloway property holdings. The investigation identified a pattern of unauthorized transfers from the company's operating accounts. The total sum removed over a 6-year period is $430,000. Patricia made a sound. "It also identified," Mr. Garrett continued, "a series of documented conversations in which you leveraged private information to exert influence over your mother and used that influence to exclude your sister from any participation in or inheritance from the family business. There is a recorded phone call in which you explicitly discuss ensuring Nora receives nothing from the estate." He looked at my brother over the top of his glasses. "The estate is prepared to refer this matter to the district attorney for review of fraud and elder financial exploitation charges. Whether or not that happens depends on what you choose to do in the next several minutes." My brother set the papers down. He looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. The certainty was gone. Not the arrogance exactly, not yet, but the certainty. He looked like a man standing on a floor that just shifted under him. "You knew," he said to me. "You knew before today." "I knew some of it," I said. "I found out the rest when your audit showed up in the envelope. You went looking. You gave me a reason to." He leaned back in his chair. He was quiet for a moment. Patricia was talking in a low, urgent voice close to his ear. He shook her off. Ms. Vance set a single sheet of paper on the table in front of him. "If you sign this," she said, "you accept the $100,000 as your full and final inheritance, contingent on a clean audit. You waive all rights to contest. The estate agrees not to pursue criminal referral provided full repayment of the outstanding $430,000 is arranged during an agreed payment plan." My brother looked at the paper. "What if I don't sign it?" he said. "Then we file the referral tomorrow morning and you explain to a judge how $430,000 moved from your father's company into your personal accounts over 6 years. Ms. Vance paused. "I've reviewed the records. The transfers are not subtle." He read the paper. He turned it over. He set it down. He picked up the pen. His signature was smaller than I expected. Neater, like he was trying to control something on the way out the door. He signed it and stood up. Patricia grabbed her bag. He didn't look at my mother. He didn't look at me. He walked to the door. At the door, he stopped. He turned back. I watched his face run through several things at once, settling finally on something that was too small and too late to be what it needed to be. He looked at me. "You were always smarter than I thought you were," he said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even really a compliment. But I had spent 29 years in a family where being seen at all was rare, and so I took it for what it was, which was the truest thing he had ever said to me, and then I let him go. The door closed behind him. My mother hadn't moved. She was sitting with her hands in her lap, staring at the middle distance, the way she always did when something had passed that she didn't know how to follow. Patricia's perfume still hung in the air. Mr. Garrett asked if I needed a moment before signing my documents. I said I didn't. I signed everything. Ms. Vance walked me through each page, the business, the portfolio, the responsibilities I was now taking on. When the lawyer stepped out, it was just me and my mother. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were red at the edges, but she wasn't crying. She looked, more than anything, tired. Not the tiredness of one difficult morning, the tiredness of years. "I didn't know," she said. "About the business, about the money. I knew he had influence in the company, but I didn't know the extent." "I know," I said. "I should have protected you better," she said. "Yes," I said. "You should have." She flinched. It was small, but I saw it. I hadn't said it cruelly. I had just said it plainly. I had just said it plainly, the way I had learned to say hard things in the years I spent building a life without a safety net. I'm going to need time, I told her. I don't know yet what our relationship looks like from here, but I'm not going to disappear. I'm not built that way. You're like your father, she said quietly, the real version of him. The one he was before everything got complicated. I thought about that later, on the drive back to Nashville. The real version. I didn't know if that was true. But I knew I was going to find out. 2 weeks after the reading, a letter arrived from an attorney I didn't recognize. The return address was in Knoxville. I opened it carefully. It was from a woman named Mrs. Alderton. She wrote that she had been the personal assistant of a man named Robert Hensley for nearly 20 years before his death the prior spring. She wrote that Mr. Terment, Hensley, had asked her, in the event that a woman named Nora Calloway ever came to light in connection with the Calloway family estate, to forward a sealed envelope that he had left in her care. The envelope was inside the letter. I stood at my kitchen counter and opened it. The handwriting inside was unfamiliar. Careful and a little formal, the kind of handwriting of a person who learned to write when handwriting still mattered. It said, I don't know if you will ever read this. I don't know if you know who I am. If you do, I want you to know that I thought about you more than you might imagine. I made decisions when you were born that I believed were right, and I have spent 30 years reconsidering them. I kept my distance because I was asked to, and because I thought distance was a kind of protection. I have followed your life from a very long way away. I know you became a teacher. I know you put yourself through school. I know you are good at what you do. I know this not because I was watching you, but because your aunt was kind enough to send me small updates over the years when she thought you were doing something worth celebrating. You were never a mistake to me. You were a beginning that I didn't have the courage to claim. I am sorry for that. I hope that your life, the one you built entirely on your own, is full of something I couldn't give you. I hope it is yours. He had left a small trust in Mrs. Alderton's care. Not vast. Not a billionaire's fortune. Enough. Enough to matter. Set up quietly with no strings attached. Nothing expected. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after I read it. The sun was coming through the window at the angle it does in the late afternoon, that low golden kind of light that makes ordinary things look briefly significant. I thought about all the years I had spent in a house feeling like background, a ghost in my own story. I thought about my father's letter. Blood does not make a successor, character does. I choose you anyway. I thought about my aunt, who had sent small updates to a man across the state so that he could know from a distance that I was okay. I thought about myself at 12 years old, standing alone at my table in the school gymnasium, holding a blue ribbon and watching the door. 6 months later, I moved back to Tennessee, not to the family house. I bought a small property on the eastern edge of the county, close enough to the mountains that on clear mornings I could see them from the kitchen window. The business needed someone present. It needed restructuring, new management, a full audit, and someone willing to do the unglamorous work of rebuilding something that had been quietly hollowed out for years. I was good at unglamorous work. I kept my aunt close. She had dinner at my house most Sundays. She brought pie, and she told me stories about my father when he was young, before the business, before everything got complicated. I listened to every one of them. My mother and I texted on Thursdays. Short messages, a photo of her garden, a question about a recipe. Small things. We were building something that had no blueprint, slowly, without rushing it toward a shape it wasn't ready to take. My brother settled his repayment arrangement through the estate lawyers. I didn't see him. I didn't expect to for a long time. I didn't wish him harm. I also didn't spend any of my energy thinking about him, which felt like the most honest thing I could offer. One evening in early fall, I was sitting on my porch when my phone buzzed. It was a message from one of my students' parents, thanking me for something I had said to her son the week before, something about not letting other people define what kind of story you're in. I sat there in the cooling evening air and looked at the mountains going dark against the sky. For 29 years, I had been the background character, the one who didn't make trouble, didn't ask questions, didn't demand to be seen. I had believed, the way you believe things you've never consciously chosen to believe, that the story belonged to someone else, and I was just passing through it. I'd been wrong about that. I had always been wrong about that. The story was mine. It had always been mine. It just took a $30 ancestry kit and a brother who overplayed his hand to finally show me where it started. I watched the last of the light leave the mountains. The watch on my wrist ticked quietly, a steady, small sound against the silence of the evening. I wasn't the background anymore, and I was never going back.